Welcome to another episode of Yell Fire, Conversations to Combat the Lie of White Supremacy. So, I live on land that is traditionally Tiwa land of the Tiwa people, specifically the people of the Isleta Pueblo here in central New Mexico. And they're still here. Just north of me is the Pueblo of Isleta. And 19, I believe, other pueblos still exist here in New Mexico, just in New Mexico. Here in New Mexico, it's a little harder to kind of ignore that fact. And so we recently moved to a new home here in is basically Isleta land. So, knowing that, being the descendant of settler colonists, what does one do with that information? Well, a few years ago, I found an organization called the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. So today's show is a deep dive into the Coalition's work of decolonization. So I'm excited to share this conversation with you. But first, so the organization's called the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. So what is the Doctrine of Discovery? Briefly, it is the religious and legal justification for settler colonization beginning in the late 1400s. The legal framework of this historic land grab exists today in the United States and elsewhere, and continues to impact indigenous people as they simply seek to exist on their own lands and on their own sovereign terms, hence the need to dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. So I have two guests this morning. At an important note, the Coalition is Indigenous-led, but the three of us in this conversation, I think this is the first time in Yell Fire that it's just been two or three white people hanging out talking. So I try to avoid that. But this the organization is working with settler colonists to kind of reckon with the Doctrine of Discovery and as the organization is titled, we're trying to dismantle it. So my first guest, Sherri Hostetler, is co-founder of the Coalition, and she's currently the Administrative Leadership and Advancement Director. Along with Coalition Executive Director Sarah Augustine, she co-authored the book So We and Our Children May Live, Following Jesus in Confronting the Climate Crisis. She and Sarah also co-host the Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery podcast. My other guest, Do Hoyer, is an organizer and song leader with the Coalition and coordinates the Repair Network, which we'll talk about in the interview. They live in Dakota homelands. They have lived there for most of their life and are involved locally with the Twin Cities repair community. As you will hear, the work of the Coalition is wide-ranging. So for details on the Indigenous repair partners of the Coalition, books that Sherri and Sarah have written, the Land Justice Fund, the work of rematriation, other resources, look at the show notes, check them out at the Yell Fire Substack. So you can subscribe to my Substack. It's at yellfire.substack.com. So without further ado, again, welcome to Yell Fire. So welcome, Sherri Hostetler and Do Hoyer, to Yell Fire. Let's jump right in, if that's all right. Is it okay if we just jump right into the conversation?
Sure.
All right, cool. So this is the first time I've interviewed two people, so we'll kind of go back and forth, and then there's going to be some either or both questions. Sherri, let's start with you. You are one of the co-founders, I believe. So let's go into Doe and Sherri are staff members of the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery. So I want Sherri to talk a little bit about the origins of the coalition and how it got started and where we are now.
Yeah. Well, the origins actually for me got started in the fact that my close friend and also Mennonite pastor colleague, Anita Omstitz, and I had been we wanted to work on climate change within the Mennonite church context. And for a while, we were basically working with Everence, which is the financial and retirement financial institution that holds a lot of the retirement plans for people in the Mennonite church, about divesting from fossil fuels. And we kind of went about as far with that as we thought we could go. And I feel like we were looking for, like, where can we invest our passion for creation and what's happening to it. And, it was always with an eye towards mobilizing the Mennonite church and then other churches to come along, like an ecological justice kind of campaign or movement. And then Anita went to a conference and met Sarah, and she came back and said, "You have got to meet this person. This is it. It's all about resource extraction and how it's destroying our world and what we need." She was just like, "You have to meet her." And that was the beginning. I feel like I've been on a little bit of a fast train ever since. Because if you know Sarah, you kind of get on a fast train when
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And for listeners, we're talking about Sarah Augustine, one of the other co-founder of the coalition.
10 years, that was 11 years ago. And we held our first annual meeting where we gathered a whole bunch of like-minded people and organizations, and it's just grown from there. And especially it's grown in the last 3 years as Sarah came on as a full-time executive director.
Mm-hmm. So, Doe, I'll move to you and how you got involved, but also kind of some of the goals of the coalition and why it matters, I guess.
Sure. Trying to think about my entry point into this kind of work. I think so. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And prior to the murder of George Floyd in 2020, there had been other police murders of Black men. So in 2016, Philando Castile was murdered by the police, and that was another, at least locally, point of activation for a lot of white folks, of really recognizing white supremacy and ongoing racialized violence. So I remember that being an entry point into the local Showing Up for Racial Justice chapter, which was not exactly my way into repair work in the coalition, but there were interconnections there that kind of led me that way. So I started becoming more involved in the coalition in 2022, after witnessing and being involved in kind of public education organizing related to Line 3 resistance in 2021. And where I found in the coalition was that there was an intersection of this work around climate justice and resisting extractivism with racial justice as well, because the doctrine of discovery really being the originating Christian doctrine that turns into our legal paradigm, which we are still under today, right? We are under a legal paradigm of ongoing colonization, a paradigm that continues to remove Indigenous peoples from their lands today for the sake of especially resource extraction. And so the coalition, for me, has become a place where all of those things kind of are part of the work, right? And we're seeing that by going down to the root of things like white supremacy and the stealing of lands and labor, that it's a different kind of call. I think a lot of times, so my experience with Surge was like, there was an immediate event that happened, and that was the point of mobilization. And what feels different about the coalition's work is because we're really looking at the root and identifying this is something that is, 500 plus years old, and it's going to take us a long time to change these laws and policies. And that's actually the work that we're being called into, right? It's like this structural change. And so as the coalition, we were formed out of the Anabaptist tradition, as Sherri was just sharing, but we make this specific call to Christians and white folks in particular because they were the intended beneficiaries of these unjust systems. And so we specifically call those folks into this transformational work of organizing for repair alongside our Indigenous relatives and partners. And that has become a big part of how we organize and who we're kind of specifically recruiting into this network and work that we're leading.
Yeah, that's excellent. I really appreciate that. The connections that you both made between climate justice and the lie of white supremacy and and indigenous sovereignty and all of those, all of the things. So yes, thanks for that context. This is a question for either or both of you. So I've been involved in the coalition for about 2 years, 2 or 3 years now. When they first met here in Albuquerque for the annual meeting, that's where I said, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So, but the structure is, in layman's term, I would say loosey-goosey. What are the strengths and weaknesses? So it's a coalition. It's a group of people, and there are kind of self-forming committees that connect around specific issues or specific needs of the coalition. What are the strengths and weaknesses of like a mostly volunteer kind of fluid organizational structure?
Well, I would say, yeah, we're a coalition, not of organizations. We're a coalition of working groups. We are an activist organization that want to be able to respond quickly to calls for solidarity coming from our Indigenous partners, but also to calls from within people who have a particular passion for some aspect of decolonization, whether that's what we call structural change work, which is, undoing laws and policies that oppress Indigenous people and other vulnerable peoples, but also cultural change work, which is actually changing the mindsets and worldviews and theologies. So both of those things are part of our work. And we have both. We have people who have we had some folks we were invited by the National Indian Child Welfare Association to help during a recent challenge to the Indian Child Welfare Act, basically stand up for that. This is a major piece of Native American civil rights legislation that came under threat a couple of years ago. So there was a group of people in the coalition that we had an investment in the Indian Child Welfare Act to some degree because of their own personal experience with it. So those folks came together and formed a working group. It's resourced by staff, resourced by, finances to some degree that we have, as long as we have them within the coalition. We've had other, working groups spring up around other things. So it is, like I said, it's really, in that sense, I guess you could call it loosey-goosey, because there are these semi-autonomous working groups that, as long as they fit within the vision of the coalition, we want to empower people to make those things happen. And I want to emphasize, we do give a lot of staff time to this as well. The downside of that, I don't know, Doe, what do you think the downside is?
I think that we are really trying to train people to become organizers. And sometimes people come in with a sense of what that skill set entails. And other times people are just really moved by what they've learned and feel this call, of the spirit or whatever else, right, towards this work. And so we're trying to just notice that a little bit more and actually break down some of these skills of organizing, so that, to Sherri's point of empowering our base to take up this work, they have the skills to facilitate a meeting well, or if there's conflict, they have some strategies for how to negotiate that as a group, just things that come up when we're organizing towards a campaign together. And so I think we've really added to our staff capacity in the last few years, which I think is a way to support volunteers, where, some working groups are entirely volunteer led. They're really autonomous because they've got organizers who know how to do all that. And others maybe need some of that support or transition time to really be more volunteer led.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, that's super helpful. So you kind of touched on this, one of you. I'm going to direct this to Doe. So, well, either of you, really. So there are a lot of well-meaning white people involved. And in my experience outside of the coalition, I've had anti-racism training. I'm involved in training and education around active allyship and those kinds of things. I don't see, in my kind of limited involvement, I haven't seen, overt education around that kind of thing. But how do you help settlers, white people, unlearn, internalize racist superiority? How do you help people? How do we decolonize our minds? And how is the coalition intentional about that?
Yeah, I'm just pausing for a moment to reflect on your question.
Yeah, sure.
Or jumping in. I think everyone's motivations for the work can be different. Some people are really moved by, a sense of the spirit in the earth, or others are really moved by more of this repair, this need to make reparations, kind of reckoning with ancestry. And so I think, yeah, that comes up sometimes, just sort of the differing reasons that people come to this work. But I would say what we're really trying to teach in the coalition is actually quite embodied practices, like in all of our trainings. So like I'm thinking about our moving toward right relations training that Sarah Augustine and Katerina Hea really developed together. And so much of that is about recognizing our own needs that come up as we do this work and noticing feelings and what that feels like in our body so that we can have better strategies like, oh, wow, I really need affirmation in this moment. Ooh, it's inappropriate in there's imbalanced power if I'm seeking that affirmation from my Indigenous colleague who's invited me to this event. But, I hopefully have a sense of other repair network folks who I can go to with my need for affirmation or whatever it is. And so a lot of it is teaching people to recognize that as it potentially comes up and have better strategies for getting those needs met. And so I don't know if that's always the paradigm that folks are used to, but that ends up taking a really strong emphasis in all of our trainings, including our organizer training. And I think it's because we know that conflict happens in this work. Like there is so much work to be done that we can't be like perfect as we do it, but we can understand that we will make mistakes, we will offend our partners, even if we have every good intention, because there are big cultural differences that we're not even aware of sometimes as folks from the dominant culture until we're in a moment of conflict. And so rather than avoid the work until we feel more ready, we're saying, no, do the work anyway. And we want to accompany you and actually give you skills that are rooted in the body and rooted in feelings and universal human needs so that we can start to have better strategies for navigating those. Curious, Sherri.
I thought that was great, Doe. I mean, I believe now we are asking people who come on as facilitators or leads of working groups to take, I think it's 2 different trainings. One is the Moving Towards Right Relation training, and one is another one that both of them are focused on both organizing skills and also decolonization work and what that really means. So we are, I think, continuing to bump up our training, as well as continuing to offer what Doe just mentioned, which is we want you to be in the work, and then we are going to be accompanying you in that work to work through things as they come up. But if we wait for, if we wait for people who aren't going to make mistakes to enter the group or have a movement, and I think embodied learning is it's part of the reason we hired a chaplain recently. We have Debbie Royals, who came on recently as she is a Native woman, and part of what she is going to do is be there to actually talk to settler people who maybe need to process what just happened in our interaction. She has a real desire to do this work as an Indigenous person. So I think we're continuing to always provide resources for what do our people need to take this next step in terms of decolonizing actions, but then the inner work they also have to do as they're doing that.
Yeah. I think I've experienced that in the story sharing committee, that kind of embodied learning and the chairs, the leaders of the group, the working group, helping us through that. So that makes sense. That makes sense. I want to pause here to we haven't talked about some of the specific partners that the coalition works with, Indigenous partners. So I want to kind of get a list of, I think there's one per year that we kind of focus on. Is that right? And then, so anyway, just talk about past and present partners.
Yeah. I'm going to kick this to Doe I'm going to do a little preamble. We have many Indigenous partners, and that's what I'm going to ask Doe to attend to. We do, however, once a year, we designate somebody as a repair partner with whom we already have a relationship to receive funds. We take a portion of our own fundraising and give it to somebody, but we never give it. We always give it to somebody with whom someone in the coalition has some kind of an established relationship. We also recently, about 6 months ago, started up a land back rematriation fund that's been actually wildly successful, that allows people to contribute their own small amounts of dollars, pool them together, and then be able to give larger gifts, anywhere up to $50,000, to Indigenous partners with whom, again, we have relationship, who are seeking to do land back, buy land. And that is its own set of criteria that we use to basically choose those people. But we have many, many Indigenous partners outside of people who are receiving funds from us. And Doe, I'm wondering if you might be willing to mention some of those Indigenous partners and the campaigns we're doing.
Sure, yeah. And ideally, with our repair partner model that Sherri was just talking about, where we give some of our general funding away every year, ideally that's the start of maybe continued relationship, or at least it has been the case for several of our partners.
Yeah.
Where beyond funding, what is useful to a particular campaign is organizing capacity and folks who are willing to take the initiative to organize their own bases following the leadership of these Indigenous partners and whatever they've identified. So I'm thinking of, for many years, members of, especially Mennonite members of our coalition, have developed a relationship with a Mayan seed saving group, whose name has evolved kind of over the years, but I think currently they're called Inlakleishimo. And so that's been a multi-year relationship where they were actually invited 2 times on delegation down to meet in person with these seed savers. And the first delegation was they were asked to bring even language translation resources so that they could better understand the systems that their Low German Mennonite neighbors were in, because there's some agricultural impacts of the systems that they are locked into and how that is contributing to deforestation or polluting some of the waters and land very close to where these Mayan farmers grow their ancestral seeds. And so, a way that group asked for support from our repair network, they put together this whole toolkit and asked folks to create seed parties. Oh, I should say, so after that first trip where they got this information gathering, they were then invited back for this seed festival. And so our repair network congregations were invited to host seed parties as a fundraiser for that delegation's return trip, to continue building relationship with those Mayan partners. And over the course of their many years, I know some of those volunteers have gone with those Indigenous partners to the UN to represent their own interests. Another one that has continued to grow over time is our partnership with Apache Stronghold. Again, started out as a recipient of these repair partner funds, but we really heard very clearly from them that what they wanted was more capacity and organizing around their campaigns. And so the work there has just grown so much. We're coordinating volunteers who are trained for prayerful accompaniment on the ground at Oak Flat. And yes, so much integration of spiritual practice and formation kind of in that work. And so that was, again, just kind of like responding to things that arose out of ongoing relationship. And I would say that's the goal. So we have some newer campaigns that we're just kind of starting to get going. And the hope is that same level of we are with you for years, right? And continuing to respond to campaigns that come up. So those 2 stand out as long-standing campaigns, multi-year relationships that really model what we're trying to do or how we're trying to engage our bases.
Awesome. Doe, I'm going to come back to you because I had questions about the repair network. If you could just describe that a little bit. Then I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Makoche Ikitupe is your piece of the repair, or your local repair group is involved with that, if I'm not mistaken. So that might be a good example to talk about. I wrote about them a couple of years ago, and it's a super interesting example. But anyway, so yeah, just talk about a little bit about Repair Network, what that is, and how congregations, local settler congregations, can get involved in that.
Yeah. So as our so we've been in existence for I think 11 years now. And as we started, we had working groups, which was really a way for individuals to join in the coalition, right? So often we were seeing what people were interested in or where they had skills and kind of matching them. And we do that ongoingly. But as we've grown, we also wanted to create a way for congregations and communities, so like geographically based communities, also make a commitment to this work and also support some of the structural change work that really has to be done. And that's what the coalition is moving people towards, right? So locally, yes, we have these Minnesota repair communities. So that's usually what we say as the shorthand. But we are specifically in partnership with Makoche Ikitupi, which is in the Dakota language means land recovery. So this is a Dakota-led nonprofit that is seeking to recover Dakota land and liberate a plot of land at a time from the traditional real estate market and kind of hold it as this nonprofit entity. And their vision for that work is, well, originally this got actually set up recognizing that if Dakota people were just to buy back land with their own funds, that's not justice. That's further injustice.
Yeah.
However, if white settlers are providing the contributions for this Dakota organization to purchase land, then that does start to be a project of reparative justice, which is the language that they use to describe Makoche Ikichupi. So there's already been this mechanism of calling settlers in to financially support Makoche Ikichupi for over a decade. They have actually 3 parcels of land now, so that can show you that kind of growth over that time. But their ultimate vision is to have 10 of these interconnected eco-villages, sites of food sovereignty. And so our work within the Minnesota repair communities is to organize behind or alongside that vision that has been set by Koche Ikichupi. So we've done particular fundraising campaigns periodically when, they've had a particular plot of land in mind that they wanted to purchase. But we've also been doing legislative organizing at the state level, again, kind of following the priorities of this Dakota group that we're working with. But this year, we've had a lot more people engaged in the Senate Environment, Climate, and Legacy Committee. We had legislation that's really been raised from this other organization, Rise and Repair Alliance, and some of the Anishinaabe activists there. And Anishinaabe culture has very strong cultural and spiritual connection to wild rice, as well as Dakota culture. And so this was legislation that was pretty unanimously supported by the tribes, but was such a, in the actual committee hearings where people are witnessing, what do the legislators say as these Anishinaabe activists speak with such heart and such wisdom of their tradition, right? And the sacredness of this food and its vital role with these ecosystems and these lakes up north. And just, I don't know, there's just so much, Robin Wall Kimmerer has this article where she points out that in English, we use it to refer to the natural world, right? And so there were so many legislators that were really struggling with this notion of why would a plant have inherent rights, Anyway, just that's some of the work that we've been engaged in, is actually showing up to those hearings, helping to pack the room so that these legislators know people care about wild rice and we're asking to protect it. This isn't only Indigenous communities that are asking for this, although that should be enough, right? But it's really a way where you start to see these are the structures of white supremacy, and organizing repair communities, just even to be in the room, actually does shift something. And even the legislators who are in support of this legislation and kind of encouraging us have said things to that effect, that you being there starts to change, or all of us, our whole Rise and Repair Alliance being in the room really starts to change things. So anyway, that was a long-winded answer to give you some sense of local work in Minnesota. And our hope is that, as we're getting more of that practice here, and then my role as a national organizer is we start to plant some of those seeds in other places, like in Kansas, where we're what could your legislative campaign be? What could you use to build your base, right? A campaign is often really effective for bringing people in. And then also thinking about how you sustain that energy long term. So it's not just one campaign, but, many that come over decades. So that's the hope, with emphasizing the need for community and the need for people to have their systems of accountability and support as they continue to commit to this work in more deep ways.
I know the Repair Network is always growing. Currently, how many communities are a part of the Repair Network?
We've got about 35 that are formally joined, and then there's more that are in discernment. Sometimes it can take, a year or more to get enough education in the congregation for people to really understand why they would join something like this. So there's, I would say, several more who have initially approached us and are maybe still working on joining in the future.
Awesome.
I'd also say there's a lot of congregations and even actually whole dioceses or area conferences who, it's sort of like in my church, we have people who are super involved in our church who aren't actually members of our church. But that doesn't mean they're not actually super a part of what we're doing. And I'd say the same thing is true for the repair network. The 35 actually, plus, the several in discernment, doesn't actually reflect the full number of congregations. And even, like I said, dioceses or area conferences that are really involved in the work, whether or not they actually have joined the repair network formally.
That actually leads me into my next question. Because Sherri, I understand the coalition grew out of the Anabaptist world, out of the Mennonite church, but it is not limited to that by any means, and it is a faith-based organization, but there's lots of different faith communities that are connecting. So can you talk a little bit about how that has been growing?
Yeah. Well, the vision of the coalition was always that we were calling upon the entire Christian church. And I would also say, and I got this language from Doe, Christian descended people who may no longer identify as Christian, but we are calling upon the Christian church and Christian descended people to undo the extraction, enslavement, and extinction that was done at one point in the name of Christ and is still done in the name of Christ. And the vision was always that that was going to be a very wide group, that had to be more than Mennonites. We're a very small denomination. But I think we did feel, because it's both Sarah and my and Anita's home denomination, home congregation, home community is actually the word I'd rather use. We saw that as a starting place. And Sarah has been working for 20, 25 years prior to this with all different Christian denominations, including the World Council of Churches. So her own roots in different denominations is very widespread. I would say, so we've got a lot of groups involved, and we have a lot of people who don't identify as Christian involved. But I will say the latest big sort of denomination that I believe is coming on board in a really amazing way is the Episcopal Church, which is, of course, much bigger and has deeper entrenchment, I would say, in empire.
Yeah.
And than the Mennonite Church historically does. So it's pretty exciting to see the rapid growth that's been happening within that denomination.
That's exciting. And I know there's Lutheran groups or maybe individual Lutherans involved. And there was a group of nuns involved at one point. so Catholic Church, Episcopal, Lutheran. So yeah, good.
Yeah.
Cool. And nuns, N-O-N.
Yes,
they're kind of in our movement ecosystem and have since renamed themselves Land Justice Futures. But yeah, definitely a trusted movement partner, and they have great resources as well. But they do primarily organize sisters or religiously unaffiliated nuns.
Okay, nice. So I've heard Sarah Augustine talk about a 100-year plan more than once. So this is, I guess, to either or both of you. What is it like to be part of a project in which we're kind of planting seeds and won't see all of the results in our lifetimes?
Well, I would love to hear from Doe on this too, but I'll just say, I think for people raised in the dominant culture to expect to see results somewhat quickly, it's a real lesson in humility. I think that in the sense of, I'm doing work, I'm planting seeds that I am never going to see come into fruition. I'm going to be lucky if I even see the seedling come up from the ground. And I should say I've seen plenty of seedlings come up from the ground, but I'm not going to be around to witness the full flowering of this. And I think, when you're used to working as some people are, within like, what's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? What are your immediate short-term goals and how are you meeting them? It's a little, and your success is deemed successful or not by whether you reach these goals within a time frame comprehensible to most human beings. It's like, it's really a lesson in time humility, I want to say. It's part of the decolonization of our own brains that needs to happen.
Yeah. Doe, how about you?
I'll just add, I wouldn't say this is true of everyone's experience, but it was true of mine, and I've noticed that others have kind of spoken to this as well. that sometimes it actually feels like a deeper breath. And maybe that's if you're used to things, like I was a part of Line 3 organizing. That construction happened in like 10 months, where there was a real need to organize response, like again and again and again, right? For in a way that felt like such a long kind of marathon. And then it's over, and then you're kind of like, well, what do we do now? So there's an arc there that I think can be typical with really campaign-based organizing, where people get really fatigued at the end and maybe even need to take a break. And so with the coalition and the fact that we're talking about a 100-year vision, and we're talking about the hope that our base would be engaging in multiple campaigns over their whole life, and also thinking about how they're going to support organizers who come after them, it becomes imperative that you not burn yourself out, and that you actually do discern internally, like, do I need a break just for like a season or something so that I can come back? And so there's actually something about working on that time scale that can invite just a little bit more like settling of the nervous system, I think, because it's not the same pace as if you're really trying to organize quickly in direct. But there are campaigns like that. I would say Oak Flat is very likely headed in that direction in some way. I pray not. But so it's not that won't come up in our work, but to actually, and I love what you were saying about seeds, Sherri, because I just planted them in the last week or so. The thing about seeds, right, is like kind of need to remember like where in the soil they are. They need a little bit more water than some of the other plants, right? So there's an interesting thing of just like continuing to hold hope for what you could see flourish there, right? Like, oh, these are the flowers that I know will be there in several months, but it's like, continuing to remember and water so that can even be possible.
Yeah.
And I think also, just because I imagine folks don't even imagine what we're talking about with the 100-year vision, what we've set, just again, this is for the imagination. This is to what is our policy target 100 years away. But we look to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a document that is affirming the rights and sovereignty of Indigenous peoples and the land. And if something like that, a document that's already been affirmed by global Indigenous communities, could be adopted as a constitutional amendment, that is a policy target where we could actually be replacing the laws and policies that come out of the Doctrine of Discovery, which got its name when it became adopted into our U.S. law in 1823 in a Supreme Court justice decision. Sometimes folks assume it got that name from the Christian doctrine, but it's more recent than that and more firmly like our laws and policies paradigm.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's actually really helpful for me because, I've been involved. I've been on the story sharing committee, and I always feel like, oh my gosh, I've done I've done a handful of little things, and I feel like I'm never pedaling fast enough and contributing enough. If I kind of decolonize my mind, I can think, oh well, I'm a small part of this community, and there's work going on around me that's well outside of what I'm contributing, and it's all helpful, and it's all in service to that 100-year vision.
And I would imagine too, Craig, that you've probably had a conversation with like a friend or two of just like, this is what I'm learning, or this is why I'm really starting to care about decolonization. And that is organizing, right? Just even having those one-on-ones. Ideally we could continue to follow up with that person and maybe bring them more into the movement, but those are the seeds too, right? Sometimes conversations that we're willing to have with the people that we're already in relationship with in our life is kind of how a movement starts to
Awesome. Well, that's a great step towards. I wanted to ask, to describe how people can get involved if people are like hearing this conversation. And I should say, listeners, we've talked about a lot of different groups and a lot of, I'll put I'll put links and stuff into the show notes so you can follow along and follow up on stuff that catches your interest. So anyway, how can people get involved in the coalition?
Yeah, I would love to make an invitation for listeners to come experience our trainings. We offer them freely, free of cost. They're monthly online, kind of split into two-hour Zoom calls. There's a manual that you can order a printed copy of or just have as a PDF. But I would say just even going to those trainings would be a way to start getting familiar with just some of our framework for organizing and the skills and practices that we hope everyone in our network is coming to embody. There's also, if folks are, more ready to just join a working group, we have an orientation every month that's kind of goes over our structure, talks a little bit more about our history, actually is a way for folks to get connected to a working group. And then sometimes folks are, really invested in their own congregation, and where they feel pulled is to invite their congregation into this discernment process of becoming a repair network congregation. So just kind of depends where people are drawn. But all of those are invitations, and you can get in touch with us through our website, or I can give you my email, Craig, if you want to share that.
Okay, awesome. Fantastic. Well, thanks, Doe and Sherri. Thanks so much for your time. And we're recording this. This will come out probably July or August. So there'll be a little lag, but it'll get out there into the world. So I'm excited about that. And I learned a bunch about the coalition that I kind of halfway knew or didn't at all know. So this has been helpful for me too.
Yeah. Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
All right. Thanks a lot. And talk to you soon.
Yeah. Take care.
All right. You too. Bye-bye. Hey, thanks for joining me. Thanks again to Sherri and Doe for the intense and really good conversation about dismantling the doctrine of discovery. Again, for details, we went over a lot of stuff. So for details on this, just go to my Substack. It's yellfire.substack.com and get all the details on the coalition's work and yeah, just deeper dive into that stuff. So thanks again, and see you next time. You can you can watch this on YouTube also if you're looking for ways to see this wherever you get podcasts, and also on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, thanks for watching. This is a second episode we've had on YouTube. So all right, take care. Bye-bye.